Okay. So last time we talked about toxic masculinity. Specifically, we talked about how men not showing their emotions is considered to be an exhibition of toxic masculinity by some people. Contrary to what you might think, I am not one of those people who doesn't believe in toxic masculinity. I do believe that toxic masculinity exists, and I'm going to give you my definition of toxic masculinity. But first, let's define our terms, okay? So let's get an operational definition of what it means to be toxic. Okay, so here we have Merriam Webster online. Definition number one, we're looking at the word toxic. It's an adjective. Number one, containing or being poisonous material, especially when capable of causing death or serious debilitation. Okay. Number two, exhibiting symptoms of infection or toxicosis. See, I've never seen that word before. I would think toxicity, but toxicosis is apparently a word. Number three, extremely harsh, malicious, or harmful. Cool. And I don't think you can see number four behind me in that little box, but it says relating to or being an asset that has lost so much value that it cannot be sold on the market. Those are very interesting definitions. Okay. So now let's talk about masculinity. Okay. Now we could try to go for a dictionary definition here, but I think we all have a pretty good idea. Especially, I would like to draw your attention to that first definition, containing or being poisonous material, especially when capable of causing death or serious debilitation. So we can talk about a couple of traits that are very common when one is discussing masculinity, or especially when someone is discussing toxic masculinity. What is the number one trait that comes to mind? Aggression, right? Aggression. And then if you want to relate it back to the video we did last time, second trait that might come to mind is stoicism, or just not showing your emotions, whether you think it's a toxic thing or whether you think it's a positive thing. Either way, containing or being poisonous material is the definition for toxic. So what if I was to suggest to you that the definition of toxic masculinity is masculinity containing poisonous material? What could that poisonous material be? I would submit to you that the thing that makes masculinity toxic is femininity. And that is not to say that I believe women are toxic or that I believe that being feminine is toxic. What I specifically mean to say is that when you mix certain aspects of femininity with certain aspects of masculinity, you get toxic masculinity. So let's go back to the part one video that we did last time. What we were specifically talking about was men not showing their emotions. Now, let's say you have a man who is conditioned to show his emotions, to express his emotions, the same way a female might be. We know how women are, theoretically. I mean, there's all kinds of stereotypes for women, right? That women cry easily, that women have mood swings, they're emotional in general, right? I'm not saying I agree with these stereotypes or disagree with them, I'm just saying that we have them, okay? So imagine, if you will, let's take this feminine trait of being emotional, and then let's mix it with that masculine trait of being prone to aggression. What do you have there? Because traditionally, men are supposed to be stoic. They're supposed to not express every emotion, right? And then we associate expressing emotions with women. So what happens when you have a man who is socially or biologically, whatever you want to attribute it to, psychologically predisposed towards aggression, but you teach that man that it's okay to express every emotion that he feels? What form do you suspect that expression might take? If they're predisposed towards aggression and you want them to express their feelings, what is a likely way that they will express their feelings? Especially if it's a negative feeling. Especially if it's a negative feeling, there's a likelihood that that expression comes in the form of aggression. Now I'm not trying to say anything here, but I'm gonna use an example. There are a few stereotypes commonly associated with the black community. Let's talk about one. Single motherhood, right? A lot of single mothers in the black community. That means there's a lot of young men being raised without the influence of older men. A lot of young men being raised without a father figure. An example of positive masculinity, right? Essentially being raised by women to be women. Being socialized under the influence of women. But being predisposed towards aggression. What do we see in the black community? Is it true that we see a higher incidence of violence related to emotional slights? Small things that you would expect a man to let slide. Fights and even murders based on honor. Situations wherein people get so emotional that it escalates out of control. These are traits commonly associated with women, right? But these are men exhibiting these behaviors, but these are men who have been raised by women exhibiting these behaviors. These are men who have been taught by women to express their emotions like women, but who are predisposed towards aggression like men. So when these men experience a negative emotional stimulus, they express their feelings, but they don't express them like women. They express them like men. And then you get violence, right? You take something that's unnatural for a man, a poison, and you introduce it into that whole cocktail of what makes you a man. See, being predisposed towards aggression isn't the biggest deal in the world when you're also predisposed towards stoicism, towards keeping yourself under control and not being prone to emotionality. But what happens when you introduce the poison of emotionality into the stew that already contains aggression? I believe that's when you end up with toxic masculinity. And I believe that that's why you see so many of these toxic behaviors exhibited in the same communities where you see the highest prevalence of men being raised by women.